What if I told you that the most beautiful women in history were slowly killing themselves in pursuit of perfection? Picture yourself walking through Versailles, surrounded by portraits of ethereal queens and noble ladies. Their skin glows like porcelain, their smiles mysterious and alluring. But step closer to those painted faces, and you'd discover a horrifying truth. Beneath that flawless beauty lay toxic powders eating away at flesh, rotting teeth hidden behind practiced smiles, and bodies ravaged by treatments deadlier than any disease. In the 16th century, European royal courts became obsessed with skin so pale it seemed ghostly. This wasn't just fashion. This was a declaration of status, a visual reminder that noble blood ran through veins that never saw common sunlight. The secret to achieving this ethereal complexion? White lead face paint, applied in layers so thick you could carve your initials into it. Queen Elizabeth I was perhaps the most devoted practitioner of this deadly ritual. Every morning, her attendants would mix white lead powder with vinegar to create a paste that transformed her into what courtiers called a living marble statue. Each layer made her more divine, each layer also more deadly. Marie Antoinette took this pursuit even further. Her daily powder ritual involving mercury-based cosmetics and arsenic-laced rouge. Her ladies-in-waiting would dust her face, neck, and décolletage with these toxic concoctions, creating an otherworldly beauty that literally glowed in candlelight. The lead slowly poisoned their bloodstreams, causing muscle weakness, severe abdominal pain, and gradual organ failure. Elizabeth's face became so damaged that removing her makeup revealed what courtiers described as a landscape of craters and sores. The cruelest irony: the whiter their faces became, the faster they aged beneath the paint. These women, desperate to preserve their beauty, were actually destroying it with every application. Yet they couldn't stop. In a world where appearance determined political power, even slow death was preferable to looking common. But toxic makeup was just the beginning. When sugar first arrived in European courts during the 16th century, it was more precious than gold. Only the wealthiest nobles could afford this crystalline luxury, and they consumed it with reckless abandon. But this sweet indulgence came with a consequence that modern dentists would find absolutely horrifying. Blackened, rotting teeth became the ultimate status symbol. Queen Elizabeth I was infamous throughout Europe for her coal-black smile. Foreign ambassadors wrote detailed accounts of her decayed dental situation, describing teeth so dark they seemed to absorb light. But here's the twisted part. Elizabeth's rotting teeth weren't seen as disgusting. They were envied. Black teeth meant you could afford sugar, and sugar meant power. When teeth became too painful, or began falling out entirely, royal women underwent extractions that would make modern torture seem merciful. No anesthesia existed, just a strong grip on wooden blocks, while court physicians yanked out infected teeth with crude iron tools. The screams of noble ladies echoing through palace halls became so common that special soundproof chambers were designated for dental procedures. Replacement options were equally nightmarish. Ivory teeth, carved from elephant tusks and wired into gums. Human teeth, purchased from executed criminals. Animal teeth filed down and forced into bleeding gums. Catherine de Medici suffered through multiple extractions and replacements, each procedure leaving her face more swollen and infected than before. Her dental agony became so severe that she developed a peculiar way of speaking, barely moving her lips to avoid triggering waves of pain. Many noble women died not from warfare or childbirth, but from tooth-related infections that spread through their bloodstream to the brain. If dental torture made you cringe, the next habit would make you wish for mere toothache. Royal women's elaborate wigs and hairstyles were architectural achievements towering feet above their heads. To achieve such scale, they stuffed their hair with wire frames, horsehair padding, and liberal amounts of pomade made from animal fat. This grease made for a warm, sticky, and very attractive home for lice. Entire colonies of lice thrived within those towering styles. Ladies of the court used special tools, long-handled silver lice claws, to scratch their itchy scalps without ruining their appearance. These ornate claws were brought to dinners, where a woman might pause between sips of wine to give her head a discreet scratch. The treatments were as dangerous as the infestations. Wigs were powdered with arsenic-based compounds to kill the lice, slowly poisoning the wearer through their scalp. Vinegar washes meant to cleanse the hair often caused chemical burns that left permanent scarring. Despite the discomfort, no one dared skip the fashion parade. Appearance was power, and even a scalp crawling with lice was better than risking social ruin. But at least lice stayed on the surface. What came next went much deeper. You might assume royal courts were clean, but you'd be horribly wrong. Most nobles, including royal women, rarely bathed at all. Doctors believed warm water dangerously opened pores to disease, inviting unseen threats that lurked in the air. The church condemned baths as dens of vanity and temptation. Women didn't have private baths or the luxury of daily showers. Instead, most nobles would use damp cloths, moistened with alcohol, vinegar, or even saliva, to wipe their hands, faces, and perhaps their necks. When a bath was finally taken, and that was rare, it was usually a communal event. Families would bathe in the same tub of water, one after the other. By the time a woman entered the tub, the water would be lukewarm, cloudy, and filled with residue from everyone who came before. Most royal women relied on heavy perfumes to mask the stench of unwashed bodies. The effect on royal palaces was overwhelming. Visitors often commented on the overpowering scent that drifted through the halls of Versailles, a strange mixture of old perfume, body odor, animal fat, and mildew. The contradiction was almost cruel. Wrapped in silks, weighed down with jewelry, and powdered to perfection, but underneath, skin that hadn't seen soap in months. Worse still was the cure for Europe's newest plague. By the late 15th century, a terrifying plague was sweeping through the royal courts of Europe. But this wasn't the Black Death, or any ordinary disease. This was syphilis, a sexually transmitted infection that arrived with Columbus's returning sailors and spread like wildfire through the promiscuous nobility. Within decades, it had infected kings, queens, courtesans, and noble ladies across the continent. The symptoms were horrifying: painful sores, rashes covering the entire body, and eventually, madness and death. But perhaps even more terrifying was the only known cure: mercury, a poison that could kill faster than the disease itself. Mercury treatment became the desperate hope of infected royalty, despite being a poison in its own right. The process was barbaric. Patients would be sealed in wooden boxes or special chambers, while mercury was heated to produce toxic vapors. They would breathe in these poisonous fumes for hours, their bodies absorbing the deadly metal through their lungs and skin. The theory was that mercury would purge the syphilis from their system through excessive sweating and salivation. In reality, it was slow-motion murder disguised as medicine. Diane de Poitiers, the legendary beauty and mistress of French King Henry II, underwent mercury treatment multiple times throughout her life. Court records describe her dramatic transformation, from radiant courtesan to trembling shadow. The mercury stole her hair, scarred her scalp, shook her hands into tremors that made writing impossible, and holding a wine glass, an embarrassing challenge. Her teeth loosened and eventually fell from her gums, creating a lisp that made her famous wit sound slurred and pathetic. But the physical symptoms were nothing compared to the psychological torture. Mercury poisoning attacked the nervous system, causing mood swings so violent that gentle ladies would fly into murderous rages over trivial matters. Paranoia consumed their thoughts. Many became convinced that servants were plotting against them or that invisible enemies lurked in every shadow. Some experienced hallucinations so vivid they would carry on conversations with people who had been dead for years. The Duchess of Ferrara, another mercury victim, spent her final years convinced that her reflection was trying to escape from mirrors. She would spend hours arguing with her own image, begging it not to abandon her. Her attendants found her multiple times trying to climb into looking glasses, desperate to follow her reflection into what she believed was a safer world. Perhaps most cruelly, the mercury cure rarely worked. Women would endure months of poisoning, watching their beauty and sanity deteriorate, only to discover that the syphilis remained. They had traded one form of death for another, and the mercury version was arguably worse. At least syphilis allowed for periods of remission, moments of hope. Mercury poisoning was relentless, each dose pushing them closer to madness and death, while offering no real hope of recovery. But mercury poisoning paled compared to the shame surrounding the most natural female function. In medieval Europe, menstruation was viewed as spiritual contamination that rendered women temporarily impure and dangerous. For royal women, whose spiritual purity was tied to their political legitimacy, this monthly cycle became a source of terror. Catherine de Medici developed elaborate deception systems to hide her menstrual cycles, retreating to special chambers and claiming mysterious illnesses. Her ladies-in-waiting were sworn to secrecy, under penalty of banishment. The materials available were primitive and deadly. Royal women stuffed their undergarments with old rags, moss from forest floors, or animal hair from stables. These makeshift solutions created perfect breeding grounds for infection. During their cycles, royal women were forbidden from attending mass, touching communion wafers, or conducting official business. Queen Isabella of Castile postponed crucial political negotiations because advisors believed her menstrual impurity would contaminate any treaties she signed. The isolation was devastating. These powerful women suddenly became untouchables in their own courts, spending days alone in darkened chambers. Some developed toxic shock syndrome from rotting organic materials, leading to rapid death that physicians couldn't explain. But even death couldn't free them from beauty's demands. In royal courts, death was never private. It was a public spectacle where even corpses had to maintain perfection. When Marie Antoinette was executed, her story didn't end with the guillotine. Court officials commissioned embalmers to reconstruct her decapitated form for public viewing. They stuffed her neck cavity with perfumed sawdust, reattached her head with metal pins, and dressed her corpse in elaborate gowns. For weeks, mourners filed past what they believed was their beautiful queen, never knowing they were viewing a grotesque puppet show. The embalming process was horrifying. Bodies would be disemboweled, organs replaced with spices and aromatic oils that often failed spectacularly, creating chemical reactions that accelerated decomposition. Isabella of Aragon's mummification became legendary when her over-dried skin cracked like old leather, requiring wax fillers and flesh-colored paint. Most disturbing was the practice of continuous cosmetic touch-ups. As decomposition began, servants would reapply makeup multiple times daily, painting fresh rouge over green, rotting skin. Living women watched these spectacles knowing someday their own corpses would receive the same treatment. Even in death, appearance mattered more than humanity. So here we are, back in those glittering halls, but now you see them differently. Those ethereal portraits no longer seem divine. Behind every painted smile lies rotting teeth. Beneath every porcelain complexion hides lead poisoning eating away at flesh. These women weren't vain or foolish. They were trapped in a system that valued appearance over life itself. In their pursuit of impossible standards, they became prisoners of their own beauty, slowly killing themselves to maintain an image that was never real. The next time you see those angelic faces in museum portraits, remember, behind every flawless smile was a life of pain. For history's most beautiful women, perfection wasn't just impossible, it was fatal.